top of my bookshelf, corralled into 2 homemade ceramic dishes, is a collection of strange and beautiful objects. They are small and crooked, broken in places, and often caked in dust. All of them were plucked from the barren ground of the Great Basin. I have cream-colored snail shells with perfect hypnotic spirals and chunks of petrified wood the color and texture of mussel. I have marine fossils from unfathomable eras of evolution and glittering topaz crystals as clear as pure spring water. I have bits of brick and rusty rebar, dormant juniper berries the color of iron, and pine nuts still sleeping in their tawny shells. Some of my objects are just a few months old, and some are a few 100 million. I call them remnants. Remnants are traces, time travelers, stubborn relics from a fleeting past. They are the obdurate things that are left behind when the flesh falls away, what remains when time has gnawed everything else off. They speak at once of death and of immortality, to the inevitable change deep time brings, and the chain of matter that links everything together and with all that has come before. Remnants is a hand-bound book containing a collection of creative nonfiction stories, each of which centers on a different object that I have found while wandering through the Great Basin, the vast mountainous desert region that stretches between the Sierra Nevadas in the west and the Wasatch Mountains in the east. The Great Basin is a strange land in many ways, characterized by its arid climate, unique geography, and low population density. The landscape lies in the rain shadow of the Sierra Nevadas and contains hundreds of long mountain ranges running north to south, which are separated by wide, flat valleys filled with saltwater lakes and plains of fragrant sagebrush. It is the kind of place where the traces of the past are easily preserved in the forms of skeletons, fossils, gemstones, ruins, and other obdurate objects. This little book contains a collection, not of calcium or cellulose, but of stories. Each remnant has a history, both before and after it came into my life. I hope that by telling the stories of my encounters with a few of them, bones, shells, gold, topaz, and wood, each can serve as an example of what an object can contain, and what the whole world must contain if a tiny piece of carbonate or crystal can hold so much within. They whisper to me day and night, and are whispering now still on my bookshelf. A whole chorus radiates from that strange constellation of collected fragments. Clustered together, caked in earth and seeped in stories, is a narrative millions of years in the making, a narrative of which I hope to illuminate just a few broken pieces. I was first inspired to write Remnants while on a hike in the foothills around my hometown, Salt Lake City, which lies at the eastern edge of the Great Basin. I had been sent home due to the pandemic, and I was trying to reacquaint myself with the natural landscape where I grew up. On that particular autumn day, I found something peculiar: seashells bursting out of the crumbling earth above the trail. At first, I was puzzled. What were these seashells doing in the soil surrounding a desert city where the only body of water is 7 times saltier than the ocean? Then I remembered the name of the trail I was hiking on, the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, the ancient edge of a freshwater lake that used to fill the Wasatch Valley 16,000 years ago. I realized that the shells I was holding, dirty and caked with desiccated dust, must have been at least 10,000 years old. I was so struck by these shells. They seemed to emanate a story. They were physical evidence of a fascinating and utterly unfamiliar past, proof of the dramatic changes deep time had wrought. It seemed so strange that I could just touch them, that I had just stumbled upon them on a hike. I knew I had to write about them. When I came to Stanford, I thought I was going to be an Earth Systems major. Growing up in the Great Basin, the impact of the environment on human life was always very palpable to me, and natural history and ecology were always areas of interest. While here, however, I fell in love with art history, and just before the pandemic, I declared it as my major, which felt like a wild leap of faith at the time. I was drawn in by art history's practices of close looking, the attention to detail it required, and the appreciation of beauty it instilled. Still, I always felt drawn to the study of the natural world and wondered how I could bridge the two. After that first hike during the pandemic, I began to notice other objects in the Great Basin and began amassing a collection. It was during this time, while thinking about these objects, that I began to see the similarities between natural history and art history. Art historians use objects as entry points into historical narratives, and while the discipline focuses on works created by humans, it actually has a lot in common in this regard with natural history, which seeks to understand how the natural systems around us developed and operate. Both disciplines draw their knowledge first and foremost from close attention to the material world and a desire to understand how the things around us came to be. Was it possible to look at my shells and the other objects in my collection through the lens of an art historian? What stories were the objects telling? While doing research for my project this year, I was able to find sources that helped me articulate this way of looking at human and natural objects. One of the stories in Remnants explores the abandoned remains of the Topaz incarceration camp. In her essay, Wooden Fossils, The Time of Japanese Internment, art historian Marcy Kwan wrestles with how to interpret the wide array of aesthetic objects made by those incarcerated in the camps. Calling them simply art does not fully capture the exceptional historical circumstances that spurred their mostly unknown makers to create them. Artistic intent is only one of many factors that led to the object's existence, which cannot be untangled from the history of wartime incarceration. Instead, Kwan suggests that we look at them as fossils of American history. Art made in the camps are material manifestations of the process and experience of incarceration, rendered frozen in time, much like a fossil freezes the body of a once-living organism through the process of mineralization and allows its trace to travel across vast distances of time. Such a reading prevents the erasure of the bodies and the circumstances that led to the object's existence. Conversely, fossils and other remains of natural processes like crystals and animal bones, although not created by humans, are not so different from art objects in this conception. Walter Benjamin, in Theory of Knowledge, Theory of Progress, a section from his work Convolute N, which examines his historical methods in the Arcades project, writes that an image is that wherein what has been comes together in a lightning flash with the now to form a constellation. Although this is easiest to see with images created by humans, an ancient seashell is a type of image, an object that carries the impression of an ancient event into the present. There is a way that we can see the ancient sea snail and its long-gone marine habitat within the materiality of the shell. Both art objects and natural objects are images of past processes of emergence, and once we stop putting primacy on human agency, the boundary between the two blurs. To me, the word remnant captures this image fossil quality that both the human and non-human objects exhibit. I think I was initially drawn to this word because it reflects the way all things in the basin, whether they be crystals, rock formations, earthworks, human settlements, or animal bones, are similarly displayed by the stark, empty desert. Out there, one encounters fossils much in the same way one encounters photographs in a museum, each presented as a striking and beautiful envoy from the past waiting to tell a story. While writing Remnants, I realized that I wanted the work to exist not just as a set of words on a screen, but as a physical object. If a photograph is like a seashell, then a book is like a fossil, an object grown from a person's experience, their thoughts inscribed into the material world, capable of enduring long after they're gone, and traveling far wider than they ever could hope to. Books, in short, are remnants too. I decided to print and bind Remnants myself to illustrate the similarities between the objects in my collection and the book. I chose the cover material, paper type, and binding technique to draw attention to the materiality of the book, and to enhance the visual metaphor of the book as a natural object, something that comes from and belongs in the Great Basin. I embraced the irregularities and errors that resulted from my imperfect cutting and sewing as reminders of the book's imperfect organic origin. Now my work has become a remnant.